Hi. Hello. Hi. Welcome so much. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. I feel kind of emotional at this moment. This is somewhat of a dream come true, not necessarily me sitting in a room talking to a camera, but rather being able to share my work with a wide variety of people that are interested in it, either because you want to do it for yourselves, or you're interested in services, or you're just wondering what this death doula thing is that you keep hearing up all over the place. So I'm so grateful you are here. I'm really excited that you're here. I'm also really overwhelmed that we're doing this, and I could not be more happy about this opportunity to be able to support you. Let me start off by announcing myself and letting you know who I am. My name is Alua Arthur, and I am the owner of Going with Grace, which is an end of life planning and support organization. I'm also a death doula, obviously, and I'm an attorney. I'm also an assistant professor at the University of Philosophical Research, where I teach a class called The Art of Dying. The University of Philosophical Research is a school that teaches the practical and profound wisdom for the 21st century. They have the coolest selection of classes. If you're at all interested, I suggest you look them up at www.uprs.org, I believe. But it's the University of Philosophical Research. So I teach a course there called the University of Dying, and it's a really cool course. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Alua Arthur. I am the founder of Going with Grace, an end-of-life planning and support organization. We exist to support people as they answer the question, what must I do to be at peace with myself so that I may live presently and die peacefully? The answer to that question is as unique and as varied as we all are, as our DNA and as our fingertips. For some people, it's about healing their relationships, reconciling who they loved and how they loved in this lifetime. For other people, it's about getting solid on the meaning that their life has, maybe reconciling ideas with the afterlife or what they've accomplished while they've been living. For other people, it's about getting clear about being okay with dying itself, maybe grappling with disease somehow. And for still many others, it's about getting their practical affairs in order. So no matter what the need is, Going with Grace exists to support people, not only as they answer the question, what must I do to be at peace with myself, but also to help them carry it through. That's pretty much the work of my organization. What I do within it is a little different, and I'm going to explain that to you today. My intention for this webinar right now is to connect. I got a lot of emails. I get a lot of emails and questions about the work itself and what it looks like day to day and who I am. And I also get a lot of questions about my particular journey. So my intention here today is to share that with you, the what of the work. I have zero interest in trying to teach you how to death doula today because A, that would be ludicrous to try to do in an hour, and B, because I've built a 12-week program to teach you how to do it. So for today, we're going to talk about the what of the work, what it looks like day to day, what it entails, what the certification programs are, if there are certification programs, what the training programs are, what skills it takes to do it, so on and so forth. So we're going to start out by talking about my journey into death douling, and then we're going to shift into the different types of training programs, and then we're going to talk about certification, and then lastly, we're going to talk about what it's going to take in order to get you going in this work. Okay. So for some mechanics, as you see, I'm here talking to you. I have on this really cute little thing because we really struggled to figure out how to get a microphone going. There's a bit of a delay, I understand. And so if you're hearing a delay, that I tried really hard. I'm in a room with a camera and my laptop and my trusty assistant, Baxley, who's sitting off here to my side. Baxley is, how do I put this into words? She is wholly dependable and loyal and loving and kind and committed to this work. And I'm so grateful to have her through this journey. I'm eternally grateful to you, Baxley. Thank you. And she is manning the chat box. So if you have questions, drop them there. Baxley is going to respond to them as much as possible. And if you've got questions that Baxley isn't going to answer and you want me to address directly, please let her know. And she's going to slide those questions over to me and I'm going to read them and then I'm going to respond to the questions. Okay. We are addressed the delay. We addressed what we're doing here today. We're going to be here for about an hour. I know it's kind of late where some of you guys are. I'm in Los Angeles and it's about 6:05 p.m. And so it's still pretty bright and early and it's going to get dark while we're talking. But if it gets late for you guys, there will be a replay of the webinar so you can watch it then to get other information if you miss anything. My intention is also to have this recorded, but I already mentioned technology, and so I'm hopeful for the best. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's see. So I wonder a lot of times how I got to be sitting here in this room talking to all of you guys out there about death dueling and this work. And I'm going to back up to when I practiced law. I'm a lawyer by trade. I went to law school, graduated 15 years ago, and then I started working at the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles. It's a nonprofit legal firm where we dealt in all things poverty law. My very first job was working with HIV and AIDS victims. I supported them in getting their affairs together for the end of their lives. And then when I graduated, I finally started working and doing government benefits. So helping a lot of people with Medicare and Medicaid and access to government benefits and, just like tough stuff that a lot of people needed support for and needed a lawyer to do so. So I did that work. After that, I transitioned into doing domestic violence work. So I supported family members through the complex legal structure and systems for handling their family law matters, particularly in domestic violence situations where there were restraining orders or needed custody plans. Again, pretty difficult stuff. People in some of the most difficult parts of their lives and wanting an attorney to support them through the process. After that, I transitioned into a community economic development unit where I help people get clear on their nonprofit organizations in low-income communities and make those things a reality. So that was my journey through the law, and that lasted almost 10 years. One thing that was happening during this entire time that I was not paying much attention to, though, was a depression was developing. It was probably mid-grade for about 3 years or so, but nearing the end of my practice, it got really severe. And I went on a medical leave of absence for mental health. I used to have a decent amount of shame around it, but I also recognize that that's the result of this big stigma that exists about health, mental health, and there was nothing to be ashamed about. I was sick. During that time, I went to Cuba, which was kind of maybe an unlikely place to go, but it was through a series of serendipities and synchronicities that I found myself in Cuba, where I met a woman on a bus. Well, actually, let me back up a little bit. I was running through the streets one day and the car almost hit me. And later on, I made it to the bus stop and started chatting with this woman, got on the bus, we sat down, we started talking. Her name was Jessica. She was 36 years old and she was German and had terminal uterine cancer. And so she was on a trip to see the top 6 places in her life that she wanted to see before she died. And Cuba was one of them. So we got to talking about life. We talked about health. We talked about disease. We talked a lot about uterine cancer. And we talked about living with disease. When talking to her about what she'd been facing so far, I learned that she had a psychologist, she had a psychiatrist through her oncology program, but they talked to her primarily about living with disease, which is its own beast. But nobody was really talking to her about dying. In the way that you can really only do when, I guess, in a foreign country and with nothing to lose, started asking her really tough questions. And I think these were questions that I probably also should have been considering for myself, since my disease, my depression, was so far developed that it could have been a serious issue. I started to ask her what her life had meant and what would be left undone if she were to die from this disease that she had. We also talked about her ideas about funerals or burials or cremation. We talked about death. And I remember looking around the bus and seeing everybody and thinking, wow, everybody here is going to die. And then looking at the bus driver and he's going to die and everybody outside is going to die and she's definitely going to die. Maybe not from this disease. And holy cow, this means that one day I'm going to die. And it was the first real conversation, the first real in-depth thought I'd had about my own mortality. it struck me that even though I was in my mid 30s, I hadn't had real conversations about death before. There weren't people in my life that were talking about it, certainly, and I wasn't in the conversation myself. And so that was the first real chance I had to really think about death and how we do it, and the fact that it seemed to be something that was so hidden, despite the fact that it was something that was going to happen to all of us. So on that bus ride, it was a 14-hour bus ride. I remember getting very clear that I wanted to support people as they prepared to die. I didn't quite know how, but I felt the little tingles on the inside. They weren't big tingles. It was small tingles. It was more like, oh, it wasn't like, ah, it just kind of was a feeling that something was coming, and something that I already knew deep within, but needed to do something to validate and make real out there in the world. Jessica and I eventually got off that bus 14 hours later, and she told me that she'd been in a car that had almost hit me a few hours prior. And it shocked me how I was really on this crash course with my life's work, truly. I came back to the States after that trip, and while I was still depressed, I had a little bit of a glimmer of hope about what my life could be. And I think it was in large part because I'd really started contemplating my mortality. And the glimmer of hope was around preparing people for their death and also preparing for my own. Through that process, I started applying for different schools in death and spirituality. I thought I was going to be a therapist to talk to people about their death. And I got into a few schools, but nothing was really like a yes, you know? So I kept putting it off, kept putting it off. I went on another trip. I met a guy. We ended up traveling the world together for a couple of years. And during that time, I took in as much information about death as I could as possible. I read every book I could get my hands on. I would go to hospice organizations when we were in different countries and volunteer in the office if I wasn't capable of being with the patients because of language barriers or just because of time or legality in the country. I took in as much as I could about how he died because I was so curious about it. I was also so taken with it, and I knew that I had work to do. I just wasn't sure. Somewhere in those couple of years, my brother-in-law got sick, and he was 43 years old, and he had Burkitt's lymphoma. And the amount of time from his diagnosis to death was only about 6 months. Around that time, my mom also had uterine cancer. And if you're watching, hi, Mom, I love you. Thank you. My mom had uterine cancer. And I remember sitting with her and also being with my brother-in-law who was sick. And thoughts of mortality just kept popping up for my mom, for my brother-in-law, for myself. And when Peter finally got a terminal diagnosis, which was about 4 months into his disease, I went to New York and supported him, my sister, and my niece, who was 4 at the time, and his parents that were elderly through the dying process. It was a powerful and difficult 2 months, I think, for everybody. I mean, not only was he dying, there was so much stuff that had to get done. If you've ever supported somebody through a death, you know how exhausting it can be. Not only keeping your emotions and keeping still and solid for whoever you're supporting, but also the things, the caregiving, the practical things, the future ideas, just a number of things that needed to get done. So during that time, I filled that role. You know, I took my niece to and from school, picked up medication, tried to answer questions about how to do stuff, research hospices, try to understand what was going on with his eye because he'd lost control of one of his optical nerves and the eye was roaming. And so it was a number of items that I kept doing during that time. But it was more about being as present for him and for them as possible. I had my own feelings about it because I loved Peter so much. He was the only brother that I ever really had. But it was more about being present for them. After his death, I remember sitting on the dining room table trying to write like a quick little guide for my sister to wrap up the things that still need to get done after Peter died. Yet it seemed like a mountain of things to do. And my sister was sitting down and she was on the couch. And I remember she was just like looking out the window. And I wondered how I could possibly get done and write down all the things that she had to do in a very short amount of time because I had to leave. And I had to go and take care of myself and time had come. So after that time, I spent some more time studying. Eventually came back to the States and found a program called Sacred Crossings here in Los Angeles, run by Reverend Olivia Barham. She teaches the art of dying, the art of death midwifery, excuse me, the art of death midwifery. And it's a death midwife program. Olivia is one of my heroes, an absolute mentor. She's an angel walking the earth. And not just because she does death work, those of us that work in death often hear that we're angels, but more in that Olivia has an easy way of disseminating profound information and wisdom. And she's so sweet and loving and kind, and she's so knowledgeable. So I studied with Olivia. Her course is run over 3 weekends. And basically, what happens is that you show up every weekend that the course is scheduled for. It's 3 different segments. And you sit in person and you discuss with your classmates, and then you discuss with her plenty. And then at the end of the weekend, you come back for the next weekend, which for me, it took me about a year to complete the course because I was traveling at that time. But let me tell you, when I first found this program, I left the orientation with like such a tremendous mix of emotions. I was crying, I was dancing, I was singing, I was elated, and I was also terrified because I felt like I finally found something that connected with what I knew to be true and what I really wanted to be true about how we die. And so I felt like this is something that I can most definitely do. And at that point, I wasn't working anymore. I had already quit my job when I knew that I was going to be doing death work. I was just so gung ho, but I had no idea where to start. So after I graduated, I thought, okay, this is it. I'm going to hang up my shingle. My name is Alua Arthur. I'm now a death midwife. Come for me. And nobody came. Nobody came. I spent probably about 6 months wondering what I was doing wrong because during that time, I was just proclaiming it from the mountaintops that this is the work I was going to do. I was trained. I had a nice website. It was like, yes, I'm going to do the thing. And nothing was happening. Whew. So I went to different hospice organizations, started going around, seeing what support they needed. I became a volunteer at a few of them. I started working for one. I served to support the board in the services that they were going to create and do some board development for a residential care facility that was going to serve as a hospice here in Los Angeles. It was called Anamkara. After a while, I also got a financial planning license to understand how financial planning and life insurance, particularly at the end of life, works. I also interned at a funeral home, this funeral home called Friends Funeral Home in Venice, California, with a woman by the name of Ziri Rideau, who is also a hero. She's a shiro. So I learned as much as I could. I got out there and started digging in. I wanted to learn some of the medical stuff because while there is a lot of medical stuff that goes on at the end of life, I wholly trust the doctors to do it. They're really good at that, and that's what they do. But I wanted to understand a little bit of it because I thought that it'd be useful. I want to understand hospice because I want to learn how to work with interdisciplinary teams. And I also wanted to know the services that they offered. I studied with this funeral home to understand what happens after somebody dies. What is the process? What happens to the body? What permits are necessary? What happens? What happens? Because I'd only seen it once so far in my life. And the financial planning bit, as I explained, was about learning life support, life insurance. Gosh, life support, I got a one-track mind. Learning life insurance so I could support people in that way. Also grief counselors. I interned with a few of them to try to understand how grief counseling works because the way that I see it, death is something that happens culturally. I don't see it as just a medical event. And I can't remember who that quote is attributed to. But death is something that happens culturally and happens to the body. And it's something that happens very naturally. And there are a bunch of systems that are set up to support in different ways. Yet I was looking for a way to bring it all together because I kept looking at how my brother-in-law, nearing the end of his life, there were people that knew certain things, but nobody that knew all the things. I remember sitting on the couch wondering, well, if we could just ask somebody this question, that would be amazing. But there wasn't somebody just on call. There wasn't somebody who was like assigned to us to answer these questions. I have to be clear that Peter did not have the benefit of a hospice team. Rather, he was in a hospital. He died in a hospital. he learned that he was terminal, like it was actually getting very close to the end, way too late before a recommendation for hospice was made. So he died in the hospital. Yet I was looking for somebody who'd be present, who could answer everything for us. And I struggled with that. And so all the places that I had questions prior, during Peter's death, and what I'd experienced otherwise, I tried to seek out to try and learn so that I would be able to support. And that's how Going with Grace was essentially formed. I exist to support people as they answer the tough question of what must I do to be at peace with myself so that I may live presently and die peacefully, and also to answer the questions. I don't have answers to a lot of them, most of them, in fact, like the big ones, like what happens after we die, if anything at all, or what is this process about? I don't know. What I do know are some practical things, some legal things, some emotional things, some spiritual things, and ways, resources where people can get support. The way that I see my role as a death doula is somebody who offers non-medical support and care for the dying person and their family through the dying process and also afterward. It's not a one-stop shop. For me, it's not about showing up to sit bedside. While it is a beautiful offering, and I do offer that, it seems to be a lot more than that at this point. The services that I offer are kind of broken down in three main categories. When people are still healthy, I support them in creating plans for the end of their lives, comprehensive end-of-life plans. Those cover a broad range of things. We look at what they need practically. We look at wrapping up their accounts and where all their passwords are, because people often forget and it becomes a nightmare. We create advanced directives. Who are your medical decision makers and what are your thoughts on life support? I help people figure out what they want done with their bodies and funeral planning. We also talk about dependent care and pet care. And while I don't create wills, I do help people think about their possessions, not just the big ticket items that we know should be included in the will, but I also help people think of their treasured and sentimental possessions. Like these bracelets, for instance, I wear them every day and they don't have much monetary value. They are brass, okay? They're not gold, they're brass and copper and a little bit of turquoise. And I'm not even sure the turquoise is real. But I do know that people in my life like them a lot. And since I wear them every day, they have some meaning to them. And because of that, things like this are what end up causing some challenges for family members after a death because they are sentimental, because they mean something. Think of the dollhouse that maybe your grandmother passed down to you, or ashes that you have of somebody else's, or the things that you use every day, the things that are important to you somehow that don't have a lot of monetary value. So I help people think through things like that in creating this complex end-of-life plan. I also support healthy people in thinking through what the actual end of their life is going to look like. Aside from just creating the plans, I do death meditations. I support people in talking about their fears around dying, help them to soften fear. Whatever ideas that healthy people have about death, I want to be able to support in, because the way that I see it is it's very useful to engage in this exercise when you're still healthy rather than waiting until illness has come. When people, well, and also recognizing that we don't all die just from illness, while most of us, the vast majority of us, will die as a result of disease and illness. Some people still do die, I won't say accidentally, but rather through the result of a sudden experience. And so for healthy people, I think it's really important to start considering what the end of life looks like. When people are ill and they know that death is coming one way or another, I support them in getting clear on what a peaceful dying means for them. And for some people, it's about creating a deathbed, like getting very clear on what the dying itself will look like. Are there particular smells that they enjoy? What colors do they enjoy? What fabrics on the skin? Who do they want around? Who do they not want around? Anything of that sort, I support people in doing. I also help people wrap up some practical affairs at the end of life, because it turns out it's also a thing that sometimes some people don't have their affairs in order and really need somebody to come in there and look big picture and say, oh, these are some of the things that could really support you. Small things, like maybe we can get different hospital gowns that don't clasp on the back, maybe clasp on the side. or we can find some ways to move bathrooms so that people can figure out how to use the bathroom easier. There's a full range of services that aren't necessarily medical in nature, but are able to support when people have disease. Okay, so that's mostly when people are nearing the end of their lives. Shortly after death, well, I also sit vigil, let me be clear, that when people are really getting close to the end of their lives, we call it the 11th hour. I sit and support, I sit with the family members. I don't always stay for everything though, because I think it's my role to empower the family as much as possible. That means that the family already knows what to do. Sometimes they just need somebody to turn to ask questions. And I would like to be there to support them to answer the questions. Yet it's really up to them because realistically, we've been dying since forever. And so we know actually how to die. It's our family members sometimes that need support through the process. And I want to support people as they help their family members through it. Right after a death, I also help family members to wash and bathe a body if they choose and if the person has chosen. This is why the conversation about what you want for the end of your life is of high importance, so that we can be clear that this is something that you want for yourself if it is. So I will support family members in washing and dressing a body to lie it in honor at home if they want a home funeral, have people come around and say goodbye to the person and the body. Maybe have a service at home, have a ceremony at home, just to create a beautiful experience for the end of life. Okay. And I think that's mostly it for when people are nearing the end of life and actually are dying. When after a death, I support in finding resources. A lot of times I see that people are struggling to figure out how to do funerals that are not like out the wazoo in terms of expenses. And so my job is to help people figure out ways where they can reduce expenses and to do things that really honor the person. Like, for instance, um, finding cheaper caskets or finding places where they can get buried for cheaper or doing a direct cremation rather than paying for the expensive cremation through the funeral home. There's a number of things that I can do to support people in figuring out cheaper funerals. I'm sorry, I think this is probably getting loud, and so I'm going to go ahead and take this off. As cute as it is, I hear it making noises in the microphone, and I do not want to distract you so much. Okay, I'm not so cute anymore. Please tell me I'm still cute. So cute. Okay. After death, I also help family members wrap up the affairs of their loved one's life. If you've witnessed or been present for a death of somebody that you know or love or care about, or were charged with helping people through, you know that it can be a nightmare of epic proportions. I mean, not only are you already really struggling with all of the emotions of the death, then you have to sift through amount of paperwork and talk to Social Security and like the DMV, and it just can become a nightmare. And so I support families through that complex process. Um, I want to give you some examples, but it's kind of hard to do so, primarily because even though the person's dead, the relationship becomes so tight and sweet. And I do my best to honor confidentiality. And there are people around them that are still living. And so I'll probably just share a couple of things or bits and pieces of things with you as we go along without doing too much to impact their confidentiality. But I will mention to you a family that I've recently had the pleasure of working with, whose parents died together in a car accident. And we've spent the last probably about 3 months trying to comb through all of their accounts, the finances, try to figure out where the money was, where it's going, what was still owed, trying to reconcile their accounts, trying to reconcile the stuff in the home, just trying to figure out what to do in order to wrap up their affairs. That's the after death services support. When it comes to supporting people that are dying, like actually looking at death because they know what it is that they're dying of, there's a young woman in particular who was in her mid 40s that also had a form of uterine cancer. And it had taken her a while to come to terms with the fact that the medicine wasn't going to cure her anymore. And that was a lot of my work with her, was in talking to her about the end of her life that was coming, and to make sure that I could do my best to offer her some support through the process. and kind of soften the anxiety and soften the fear. And for the pre-planning, well, that's available for all of us right now. I recently worked with a couple in their 30s that want to get going because they're thinking about having babies, and they want to make sure that their affairs are nice and tidy, and that if anything were to happen to one person or the other, that they are capable of handling everything afterward. So those are some of the examples of the work that I do, and big picture, what my work, big picture, very, very, very big, broad picture looks like. Day to day, realistically, I'm spending a lot of time on the phone. I talk a lot. I talk to people regularly. People are either calling and explaining what they need, and I'm talking them through it, or they want some resources on dealing with grief, and so I'm supporting them through that, or they want to talk about death. And really, it's my favorite topic. And so I'm more than happy to talk about it with them. I want to be clear on something though before we go too much further, because I think this often gets lost in translation. I don't think that death is all glitter and rainbows and joy and beauty. I think that it can also be very painful and difficult and messy. And part of the reason I do what I do is because I feel that with the support, it does not have to be that horrible. It's already horrible. It's already horrible. Yet if we can do a little bit to make it a little bit easier, that's what I try to do. Okay? It's my favorite topic because I think it holds all of the profundity in the world. Like, it's hard to not feel enlivened when consistently standing at the threshold of a mystery, of the greatest mystery that exists. None of us know the answer. And it brings so much of who we are into focus, such that death to me holds the key for how I live and how we all live. And I think if we continue to try to relate to it from that perspective, it's a practice. If we continue to practice to relate to it from that perspective, we have opportunities to create greater meaning and joy and peace and love and beauty and all those things for ourselves while we are living. So you got a lot of the what of the work. Now I just told you the why of the work because I get going on it and I can't stop. And now the how of the work, really. How I started doing this, I already mentioned to you my process through deciding that death was the work for me, and also how I got trained and how I started Going with Grace. But at this point, it's Going with Grace is a fully functioning organization. I often hear that people don't or can't make money being death doulas and end-of-life planners. And I want to be clear with you that that's probably just their experience, that perhaps it's not the experience of everybody. I've been able to find ways to support myself doing this work because I have responded to the needs that I've seen when I've been out there in the field. When I first got started and family members would call me and I'd show up to sit vigil or be there for the 11th hour, they start asking additional questions like, hey, what should we do with the car? Or he has a bank account and I tried to get into it today and they told me that I'm not going to be able to get into it after he dies. Or better yet, I have a better one. I have a power of attorney and I'm going to use a power of attorney, yet I don't know how I'm going to keep using it after death, because powers of attorney, they are no longer functional after somebody dies. And so there I can immediately say, well, we should think about that. We should probably start doing something about that now while the person is still living, rather than wait until after a death. And initially what was happening was that I'd show up, people would ask me these questions, and I'd say, oh, well, let me see. I think I can find ways to support you. And then I'd go out and I'd try to learn it real quick, and then I'd come back and I'd answer their questions. Even worse yet, I'd be like, oh, I'm sure the DMV has an answer, or maybe you should look here, rather than just find the answer myself to be able to give it to them. Because what I was doing was I was in turn giving my clients more work to do by giving them an additional task, rather than just being the one knowledgeable so that I could properly support them in a professional capacity. So that's where my work right now looks like. It's a response to the needs that I saw reflected in me when I was out doing the initial death midwifery work. I saw that people needed things, and so I started to support them to do it. I want to also mention that this is not the only way to do it. I want to make that abundantly clear, that this is the way that I do it. This is the way that calls on my particular gifts and talents and skills and the needs that I've seen reflected to me and my offering to the world. This is mine. And there are as many different ways to death doula as there are individuals out there. And all of us do it a little differently. All of us have different backgrounds and different things that really work with us. My work right now doesn't look like what I learned in my training because I've made it my own and I've responded to what I saw and I'm making a living doing it. That doesn't mean that the training was not adequate. The training was wonderful. Olivia taught me so much, but my work right now looks very different. So I want to address trainings very briefly because I think that you probably have a lot of questions about that. I'll drink some water first because I'm getting parched. Okay. There are a number of different training programs out there, and they teach a lot of very different things. I've only done one, and so I can't speak to them all, and I wouldn't have the hubris to tell you that one was better than another because I don't know. And as I mentioned earlier, it's most important that you are finding a trainer and somebody to teach you that you really resonate with, because they're going to teach you how to do what it is that they do. And then you're going to send that thing out there into the world to do it with your own unique stamp on it. So if you take nothing else from this, take that if you are going to seek training, find a trainer that you resonate with. It's very, very important that you find somebody whose work you feel strongly about, somebody who's actually doing the work, and somebody's work you feel strongly about, because they're going to teach you what they do and you're going to do that out there. Okay. That's the whole nugget for the whole hour. If you get nothing else from this, please put that one in your back pocket for tomorrow. There's a number of training programs. They teach different things. They range from weekend-long programs where you pay a set amount of money and you show up for a weekend, you do some in-person work, and then maybe there's some online component, and then you have a certificate. There are online programs where the majority of your work is done at a distance and you're working with somebody online. There are programs that are a combination of the two. The programs range from, I'd say, about $700 on the cheap side for a certificate to the more expensive $2,700 for other programs. So it's really important that you keep a bunch of these different factors in mind as you decide what training program you want to undertake. Keep in mind the price, what you are willing to afford, the trainer, who it is that's going to be teaching you what they do, and if it's work that you want to do the way that they do it, and also the type of program. Is it online? Is it in person? And what do you most resonate with? My program was an in-person program. I did this program. It was 3 weekends, but I did it over the course of a year. And it was wonderful in person. We spent a weekend together. And what I enjoyed about that program was that I had people to bounce ideas back and forth from. However, I felt that a lot of the people that I was sitting with and talking to were the choir. I was talking to people that shared ideas about death the same way that I did because we were all in a death midwife training program. The work really began, the exercises really began when I left the training program and I went into the world and I started talking to people about what I wanted to do and what I was studying and what I was learning. And they responded in a variety of ways. That's where I got a lot of my training, I'd say, and a lot of my experience was in talking to people out there who were not already sold on the ideas about how we die in this world, but rather the people that were still starting to think of it for themselves. That's what made a key difference for me, is being able to talk to other people about it. So as I mentioned, I really enjoyed the in-person portion of my training, but one thing that served me tremendously was being able to take it out there into the world. And so it is useful across the board. If you're going to do it in person, fantastic. If that works for you, go for it. If you're going to do it online, you still have plenty of opportunities to practice and to engage with people out there in the world, either through discussion forums on Facebook or chat rooms, or just the people that you come across at the grocery store. Man, let me tell you, when I go to CVS and I'm standing in line and it's been a really long day and somebody asks me what I do and I try to explain it to them, that is a constant opportunity I have to be learning how to work with people who are not yet perhaps as comfortable with the ideas of death that I am and the people in my community already are. That's where a lot of the work comes around. Okay. So I mentioned the training programs. There's a number of them out there. I should mention here that I'm creating a training program myself. In fact, I have created it. If you're interested in joining this program, you can head to my website, which is www.goingwithgrace.com, and you will see a section on there for the training program. I'm going to take about 20 people to begin with to get started. And we're going to dive right in and find new ways to relate to planning for the end of life as our culture and community looks right now. I also want to talk about certification programs. Let me check the time. Okay. I want to talk about certification programs and get to some of these great questions. Oh no, I can't read your handwriting. Okay, we're going to figure this out somehow. I want to talk about certification programs. There is no general certifying body of death doulas out there. Okay? If a program says it offers you a certificate, that certificate is probably a certificate of completion. That means you did the program and you did all the necessary steps. You turned in all the assignments and all the homework, and now you have a certificate. There is no body currently that exists that covers all the core competencies of the work of death doulas. That's another little nugget you should put in your back pocket if you want to hear nothing else from what I've said today. You can go to any program you like right now. There are people out there that are working tirelessly. I'm looking at you, National End of Life Doula Alliance, called NEDA. If you're interested, go find them on the internet. They are working very hard to create a list of core competencies for death doulas. And bless you guys, because it's necessary to make sure that the work that we're doing is becoming more standardized, okay? And so there is no certifying body right now. If you want to do this work, what you do is you go to one of these programs, you learn all the things that the teacher has to teach you, and then you go out there and you do your best to do it with honor and dignity and integrity. And you respond to needs, and you call yourself a death doula if that's what you'd like. That's how it is right now. Okay. It's also of utmost importance that you get some experience in the field. And by experience, I mean straight up, just go volunteer for a hospice agency. Hospices are our friends, our very good friends. I adore the work that they do. I often get this question about how my work differs from a hospice social worker, or not quite a nurse, but particularly a social worker. Here's how I think it differs. Oftentimes, I'm often meeting people long before they are actually on hospice. I help people find a hospice program that works for them very often. And so that's one regard, is we're meeting people very far upstream. My job, I find it, is to bring all the pieces together, from the hospice to the life insurance and the practical, and just to be there and to answer all the questions and to explain to them what chucks are and why they're necessary. Chucks are the pads that go under a body or under a human body to catch fluids and things like that. Try to give an extra level of support. We're not working at odds with each other. I think that we're working very well together. And I'd like to create more alliances, more ways for death doulas and end-of-life planners to work with hospice agencies. And so if you have curiosity about what that's about, that's my one person's explanation, one person's idea. So I suggest that if you want to get started, you need some experience. So go volunteer for a hospice agency, okay? Sign up, find one in your neighborhood. Just start doing the thing. You're going to learn so very much. You're going to gain valuable experience. You're going to create alliances and gain connection and feel good about what you're doing, and also support this tremendously important part of death care, okay? So that's one solid way you can get started. Read. There are a lot of great books out there, and reading is a great way to take in some information, at least read the thoughts of people that have been doing this work since time immemorial, people that have thought about it far more than we have right now, or maybe commiserate with what we've thought about it. They've just written it down. One of my favorites is a book called Die Wise by a man whose name is Stephen Jenkinson, who is, this man's brain is like a international treasure because he's Canadian. So this book called Die Wise, I think I have it here. Yes, it's right here. You can't see it. But that book it holds so much juicy information and provides opportunities for you to start thinking about and relating to death in different ways. It's called Die Wise by Stephen Jenkinson. I also suggest that you really start thinking about what your particular gifts and tools are. What are the gifts that you've been given? What are your skills? Where do you shine? How do you see your work out there in the world? What do you see as your offering? What is it that you want to contribute? What does love look like in the face of death for you? If you could answer that question, you're going to be well on your way to getting started along this path. I think that most of us already have a lot of the skills that we already need in order to become death doulas and end of life planners. Yet one very important key component is that you build a relationship with your own death. I don't mean that you have to have no fear of dying. That would be absurd for most of us. I'm suggesting that you spend some time thinking about where you feel discomfort around death. What would be undone in your life if you were to die tomorrow? Where you still have some ick feelings when it comes to it, because you want to do your best to stay a neutral sounding board for your clients and the people that you're going to work with. Lastly, I also want you to think about whether or not you want to do this personally or professionally. There is a solid group of folks that believe that death doula should not be paid and this should be a volunteer job. That's fine. That's great. I also think, though, that we offer valuable information and resources and support, and I believe that our work, because it is actually work, gets to be compensated. And the amount that we all charge differs depending on who is doing the charging and who is doing the work. Some people come with a different set of professional skills, and so they're able to charge a little bit more or a little bit less. But I think it's important that we not discount the work that we're doing because it is supportive work. It is still very, very valuable. Emotional labor and practical labor is still labor, and it gets to be supported. Granted, it is a labor of love. Okay, I think that's most of what I had to say. So I'm going to go to some questions for the last remaining 15 minutes. So here's a chance to fire them up at Baxley, and I'm going to look at a few right now. Great. Okay, what are the limitations under law regarding helping someone else complete forms like advance directives and POA if they aren't an attorney? There are currently, as far as I know, no limitations for helping somebody complete these forms. What you're doing is being a support person as they complete and they decide what they want for themselves. It might be tricky if you're also going to sign as a witness, particularly if you're related to the person by blood or by marriage, you're not over the age of 18, you're a healthcare provider in some sort, so keep that in mind. Your employee, spouse, somebody of the healthcare provider. Otherwise, you can support them in filling it out. You're not restricted to doing so without any type of training. Okay, I hope that's clear. Do you make yourself available 24 hours a day as a death doula? Ha, 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 ha. This girl got to sleep too. A girl's got to sleep. So I am available a lot, and I do get a lot of questions. And sometimes when I have a client or a family I'm working with, when I know that death is imminent, I will sleep with my phone on, my ringer on. I normally sleep with it on airplane mode if I don't have a family or somebody that's imminent. But I am available a lot because people need support, and I want to support and empower as much as possible. So I'm available. But like I said, a girl's got to sleep. And a girl's got family and friends and dates and boyfriends and things she got to do. How would you recommend starting work in the role of a death doula? What legally can we start doing without certifications and licenses? So the question is, how would you recommend starting to work in the role of a death doula? What legally can we start doing without certifications and licenses? How I recommend you start working is that you get some training through a program that you trust and somebody that you trust, somebody whose work looks like the work that you want to do out there. Because as it is right now, there is no certifying body, so you don't have to be certified in order to start doing the work. But I do think it's very important to talk to somebody who's been doing it for a while and get some guidance on how to do some of the things, because there are nuances that you're going to learn from somebody that you can put in place while you walk out there in the world. If a power of attorney is not appointed, how does that work if the person can no longer appoint? Well, it doesn't. So a power of attorney is a form that's used to get access into places like bank accounts and PO boxes and safe deposit boxes, etc. And so the power of attorney has to be completed when somebody is still sane and still capable of signing this form and actually granting their power. And so if they're not able to do it before that point in time comes, then you cannot have a power of attorney. Think of it this way. The power of attorney says, I, Alua Arthur, being of sound mind, hereby give you the power over my affairs. And if I am no longer of sound mind, I cannot grant my power to anybody. Okay? So a power of attorney can't work if the person is not of sound mind in order to grant it. This really comes into play when we're talking about diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia. So extra important to get some of these affairs handled while you're still healthy so that when time comes, we're not scrambling to try and figure it out. How do you go about charging? Oh, this is such a fun question. So it's been kind of challenging. And realistically, part of the reason I'm doing this webinar and I've created this training program is because I spent so much time out there trying and failing and trying and failing. Let me do this a little bit. Oh, that doesn't work. Okay, let me do this a little bit. Oh, that's kind of working. Let me tweak it. Now let me try this. I've been working on this for 6 years now, and I'm finally at the point now where I am self-sufficient. It's been a while that I've been making my own money doing this work, but it's been really a work of trial and error, trying to find out what works. And so I charge based on a number of factors. There are some services that are a flat fee, like an end-of-life planning consultation. That's a flat fee. However, when it comes time to doing things like supporting a family member at the end of life, that really varies because they might want me to sit vigil. They might want me to be their bedside. And I'm most definitely not going to charge my hourly rate for that because it's a different type of work and a different type of service. It's been a conversation that we've all been having. And by we, I mean my colleagues in this field, the other death doulas that are out there doing this. And we've been trying to figure out how best to go about it. A flat fee seems to work for me, because I take on the onus if my work extends past a certain number of hours, rather than putting it on the family in order to decide. So that's how I go about charging it. Sometimes it's a flat fee, and at other times it's a flat fee for my planning consultations, and sometimes the rates vary when I'm sitting bedside or working with the family members. Okay, the next question is, at what stage of dying do people typically start to work with a doula? At what stage of dying do people typically start to work with a doula? I'd say they start working with a doula as soon as they're aware that disease and dying may be around the corner. Of course, I suggest that you actually start working with a death doula when you're still healthy so you can get your plans in order, because we never know what diagnosis might be around the corner. And that's not a question of fear. That's just a question of the mystery that life is. But I'd say that it's important to start working with a death doula when disease has started getting to the point where, well, let me put it this way. I worked with a family once, and their brother was ill. He'd been ill for a while, and they wanted to know what they need to do to get his affairs together. And I asked the sister what she meant. And she said, well, I don't know. Like, we just want to get his stuff together. Yet when she was talking to me about what they still had to do, he had a series of appointments and radiation, and there was a surgery scheduled, and there was this and there was that. And it sounded like a lot to me for somebody who's also thinking about getting his plans together. Don't get me wrong. I don't think that you can't plan while also seeking cure and treatment. Okay. But in this case, just the energy behind the conversation about getting his plans together sounded like death was on the horizon. So I talked to him about it, and he said to me very clearly that he was tired, that he no longer wanted to do any of the treatments, that he didn't want to keep going the way that he'd been going. And so in that case, it was of vital importance to get a doula involved, to support him, to empower him, to become a patient advocate with his family and also with the medical professionals. It's important that we think about disease and we think about progressions of disease. That's something that we learn in the course of our work. And I think that's an important component of a training program that you're going to undertake, is that you think about disease and how to relate to it. So that's one answer. Oh, okay, thank you. Another question is, how will you choose your inaugural class? Oh my, this is so fun. Okay, so I have an application on my webpage that has an application fee attached. And the application fee is just to support us in getting the foundation set up as we go along. And I want to be clear that the application is not looking at who's the top of the pops and the smartest and the brightest and the best in the field. I'm not looking at that. I'm getting information in order to figure out where you're coming from and what your background is so we can figure out how to best support you through the program. I'm going to take initially 40 applications, and then I'm going to choose from there. That doesn't mean that not everybody is going to have access to the program, but I'm going to work with probably about the first 40 people that I get, and then we'll go from there to see who else would like to join the program. Hope that answers your question. And for advanced directives, do you only need the paperwork to be notarized, or do you still use your law degree? This is a great question. I don't use my law degree very much anymore. You don't have to be a lawyer to do this work. You don't have to have a college degree. You don't have to have any particular background. I think you have to have an open heart, a decent, healthy dose of compassion, a desire to do good work. And I also think that you need to get some training about the practical, legal, psychosocial, spiritual elements of being with dying. So you don't need a law degree to do this work. And in most states, the advance directive just needs to be signed in the presence of 2 witnesses. In some states, it's even 1. But in most states, it's about 2 witnesses. It does not have to be notarized to be a legally binding document. Okay. In helping one who has long-term disease like Alzheimer's, how does your role change? That's a great question. I am able to support people with disease like Alzheimer's because I'm working mostly with the family. I worked with a woman who was probably about 93 when I first met her, and 95 by the time our relationship was over. And I got to know her. I felt at some point that there was a bit of a sense memory when I would show up again, but every single time I asked for her permission to talk to her and to be there with her. And as Alzheimer's goes, sometimes she was joyful and excited, and other times she was angry and combative, and other times she was happy I was there, and other times she wanted me to go away. And I was with her and watched as her disease progressed, finally to the point where she was no longer able to put sentences together. In that role, I was there particularly to support her family member through her disease. So it was wildly important that we worked with things like the home and making sure that, toileting and ambulation, and that some of the furniture, I noticed that she had a bruise that kept getting worse as she kept bumping into this one thing because she wouldn't notice it every time she turned around the corner. So things like that, moving the dressers out of the way, helping to figure out food and things of that nature. So in a disease like Alzheimer's and dementia, I'm mostly supporting the family. I'm only going to take about 2 more questions because time is wrapping up here. And I swear I could keep talking, but it's already late in a lot of different parts of the country. I'm also parched. Okay. Is postpartum involvement with the body required? No, it isn't. It's important that if this is the work that you want to do, that you set your boundaries about what you're willing to do and what you don't want to do. And you do the work the way that feels best to you. As it is right now, as I mentioned, there's no certifying body. There's no core set of skills that any death doula has to have. And so you can get pretty clear on the work that you want to do until such point as there does become a certifying body and licenses or something are required and very clearly states out the work that we have to do. You create your boundaries about what works best for you. If you are uncomfortable with bodies, that's okay. My encouragement is that you dig into that and you try to uncover for yourself what that's about. And let's see. Oh, this is a question I'm going to answer. How do you take care of yourself? How do you get emotional in this work? Is this work recommended for empaths? And my own self-care. Self-care is a really big question, and I think it probably a really solid note to end on, is that self-care is of vital importance in this work because we are holding so much for other people. It took me a long time to learn the difference between compassion and empathy, between taking somebody's stuff on as my own and being able to hold space for theirs. And so I hold a lot of pain. I hold grief. I hold comfort, discomfort. I hold fear. But through practice and through some of the skills that I was taught through my training, I work to hold it and at some point put it down rather than take it within. I also create plenty of space for my own pain. Sometimes the pain belongs to other people, but yet it's of high importance that I check in to see what pain is mine and what pain belongs to somebody else. And the ways that I do that are by honoring my body as much as possible, by giving myself space to cry. Recently, I was having a very weepy, saddy day, and I felt that I was crying for myself that day. I wasn't crying for somebody else, even though there was a client that had recently died. I think, well, you know that term, you cannot pour from an empty cup. I think in this work, it becomes even more important because not only can you not pour from an empty cup, but you certainly can't pour from a cup if you can't tell that there are cracks in it and that it's broken, which is why it's important for us to get clear on our own ideas about death and dying, to build a relationship with death, to build relationships with our lives, to build relationships with our boundaries, and to make sure that our cups are as solid as possible so that we can actually support people through what is one of the toughest and profound times of their lives. Okay, so I'm going to close pretty soon by addressing two things. First, next steps. It is, if this is work that you want to do for yourself, either personally or professionally, I again highly suggest that you find a hospice in your area and you start volunteering there. It's going to go a very long way in building a relationship with death. If you are curious about my program, go to my website, www.growingwithgrace.com, and fill out an application. And we're going to collect the first few of them and take a look at them and get this first class going for the program. This first class is going to have a lot of personal involvement. We're going to work together as a group to move forward. And I trust that by the time that this initial group is done, there are going to be some G death doulas out there in the world. And by G, I mean gangsta. And by gangsta, I don't mean the type that goes and shoots things up. I just mean like really, really amazingly solid. Lastly, I want to thank you for the opportunity to do this work that is so near to my heart and that I believe that I know changes the way that we relate to dying, and more importantly, changes the way that we relate to living. I was born to do this, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to support you as you uncover for yourself if this is what you're also here to do. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your rapt attention. Thank you for your focus. Thank you for the love. Thank you for the support. Thank you for the encouragement. Thank you for heeding the call. Thank you for joining me. And that's all I got.